and welcome to this exciting talk about sunshine. Today we will be talking about the impact of sunlight and sunshine on our physical and mental health. My name is Olga Runcie. I'm consultant psychiatrist and sleep specialist. I work in Albine Hospital in Aberdeen. I treat people with mental health conditions and sleep difficulties, and I have huge interest in impact of natural environment and sunshine on our medical and mental health. We have quite an ambitious plan for the presentation. It consists of two parts. In the first part, we will cover signs of sunshine, connection between sunshine and vitamin D, endorphins, melanin, mitochondria. And the second part, we will review some evidence and research assessing impact and benefits of sunshine on physical health and mental health. At the end of the presentation, we look at the sunshine prescription. And my aim for this talk is to demonstrate that our enjoyment of sunshine is not just psychological, but it is deeply rooted in our biology and our health. Okay, let's start looking at the signs of sunshine. The first couple slides, a little bit heavy, a little bit busy, and complicated. I'm sure the rest of the presentation will be much more exciting and easier, but these two slides very important to cover, to make sure that we all on the same page and we understand what we're talking about, and that's setting the basis of our understanding of light. Light is ultimately a solar radiation or electromagnetic energy coming from the sun, and it's provide us with light, heat, and energy for photosynthesis. When we talk about light, we initially assume visible light, light which allow us to see, to form vision forming system. But this light is actually only provide 42% of total solar radiation. The length of this light is between 400 and 700 nanometers. But there are other spectra of light, for example, ultraviolet light below 400 nanometers. This light provides about 5% of total solar radiation, and it's also divided in groups, ultraviolet C, B, and A, and it has abbreviation as UVC, UVB, UVA. But the major part of solar radiation is actually infrared light. This light is above 700 nanometers, which makes up to 53% of total solar radiation. And it's also divided in subgroups as a near-infrared, mid-infrared, and far-infrared. And look at this graph, how far that spectra goes and how much light is there that we usually not assume as a part of light, but it is. Why is it important for us as humans? Obviously, the visible light, it is also called photosynthetic part of light, give us vision. We have receptors in our eyes which interact with those photons and provide us with vision forming system. So we can see colors, and we have receptors for red, for green, and blue waves of light. But we also have a receptor specifically sensitive for 480 nanometer of light. It's a kind of cyanide blue, and this receptor and enzyme called melanopsin. And although it is a part of visible light, it does not take part in the vision forming system, but helps us with circadian regulation. It sets our biological body clock, signaling night and day. What about ultraviolet light? Ultraviolet C is deadly, but lucky for us, it is fully absorbed by ozone layer, so we don't get it from sun, although we humans can produce UVC as a part of our technology, for example, welding. UVB is exceptionally important for our biological processes because it's a very biologically active type of light. This type of light can interact with lots of molecules, chemicals in our body. And on this slide, I put a name of various compounds which respond to UVB, have direct interaction with UVB. What it's mean that chemical bond in molecules can change in response to UVB light, and that is what provides activity transforming light energy into chemical and electric energy. And UVA can penetrate deeper into our skin compared to UVB, but although it's penetrate deeper, it's 1,000 times less biologically effective compared to UVB. Interestingly, we also have specific photoreceptors sensitive to UVA light in the range of 380 nanometers. There is gene coding for this receptor, and the protein called neuropsin specifically receptive to this wave of light. Interestingly, it was found in our eyes, but also in other parts of the body, including internal organs. And here is the huge question: if we have receptor specifically sensitive to UV light, that means that we need exposure to UV light. That means that something happening in our body, and although we not fully understand the function yet, if these receptors are so widely distributed in the body, there must be very important function. What about near infrared and infrared light? There are lots of disputes, and if you look at the literature, there is still not enough consensus and understanding of biological impact of infrared light. Some studies will say that this light penetrates only for 1 millimeter into our body, up to maybe 5 centimeters, but actually more recent studies done with use of extremely novel and sensitive technology, stating that infrared light can penetrate very deep into internal organs. For example, group from University College London using a very, very modern technology, saying that infrared light can go through our body and some photons can be detected entering on one side and leaving on other side of the body. So saying that our tissues have relative transparency to specific wavelengths of light. Infrared light is absorbed by cytochrome C oxidase, specific enzymes in mitochondria, and also absorbed by mitochondrial water. And recent studies, more kind of modern studies, demonstrating that have major impact on mitochondrial function, impacting at least 60% of cells in adult body. Okay, so we covered signs of light. Now let's look a bit closer at sunlight and vitamin D. We all heard somewhere that vitamin D is a sunshine vitamin. But when I speak to my patients and usual kind of clinical practice, although people know that vitamin D is sunshine vitamin, there is very little understanding about actually how it is produced and what is required for our body to make adequate amount of vitamin D. Vitamin D is produced in our skin in response to UVB fraction of sunlight. So not just sunshine, not just any light, it is specifically ultraviolet light and specifically within range of UVB. And our skin need to interact directly with this part of sunlight. It means that need to be unprotected, because if you have clothes, the clothes will absorb this part of light. So you need to have a skin interacting directly with light. And if this happens, then certain chemical processes will take place, converting pro-vitamin D3 into active vitamin D3. So what happens in our epidermis, it's actually 7-dehydrocholesterol that will be converted into pre-vitamin D3. Yes, it is cholesterol. So cholesterol, not all evil, it has lots of essential functions. And then this vitamin D3 will go into liver, will get metabolized, then it goes into kidneys, will get metabolized again, and eventually it's converted into most active form of vitamin D3. And in combination with the protein, which helps to take vitamin D into cells, it will go inside of the cells and will act with vitamin D receptors, which are nuclear receptors, so they inside of the nucleus. 80% of vitamin D source coming from sunshine, and only 20% coming from diet, which is what my patients also asking if I am on all-inclusive, very good diet, rich diet, will I have enough vitamin D? Even with rich diet, possibly not, because it's only 20%, and also considering that you have plenty of animal source of vitamin D3, and if you're vegetarian or vegan, vitamin D2 are usually present in some form of mushrooms which were grown with exposure to UVB light. Why vitamin D is so important? Because it's interact with nuclear receptors and affect transcription of more than 2,000 genes. So it's a phenomenal number. That's many processes in the body will be dependent and responding to presence of vitamin D. So we all know from our childhood and school education that vitamin D is important in mineralization of our skeleton. It helps calcium and phosphorus metabolism and absorption. And we historically know about disease called rickets, when people did not have enough vitamin D and their bones do not form properly. But it's not all. It's only one of possible roles of vitamin D, because vitamin D is such an old molecule. It's one of the oldest hormones. It's called vitamin, but it's actually hormone. And all such ancient molecules that existed in evolution for millions and millions of years have multitude of function, because it will be very costly for evolution to have just one chemical per one function. So the same compounds will execute dozens or maybe hundreds of functions. So another important role of vitamin D is immunomodulation. It's enhance our innate immunity. It means how our body fights bacteria and viruses and other invaders, but also downregulate adaptive immune response, which is important in autoimmune conditions when our immune system can be a bit too active, too much activity, and start affecting own body. So that is what's happening. So vitamin D help us to find viruses, bacteria, and other kind of not diseases formed by the agents, but when it's coming to respond to our own tissues, it actually helps to calm down immune response. Vitamin D is also very important in regulation of biogenic amines. What are these biogenic amines? It's chemicals like serotonin, dopamine, and many people know that serotonin and dopamine extremely important in the regulation of mood, biological rhythms, activity level, motivation, energy. How is it involved. Let's look at this picture on the right of your screen. You'll see in a blue oval shape, name is tryptophan. Tryptophan is amino acid that widely distributed in food. It is an essential amino acid. It means that in our body we're not able to synthesize it. We need to get it from food sources. But once we eat food, we consume tryptophan, and tryptophan is the precursor of serotonin, and further away melatonin. But it needs to be converted into active forms. And at the initial stage, you'll see that reaction should happen from tryptophan to 5-hydroxytryptophan. For this reaction to happen, we need to have certain enzymes to facilitate this reaction. So you have these two enzymes. They call tryptophan hydroxylase 1 and 2. But in order for these enzymes to be synthesized, that is when we need vitamin D to act on vitamin D receptors in order to kind of encourage expression of this enzyme. So without vitamin D, this reaction would be slowed down, will be kind of struggling to go on an expected and desirable way. And if it does not go in a desirable way, it can go in a peripheral way. That's called chondrogenic pathway, which is inflammatory promoting pathway. Yeah, so for these enzymes to act properly, we need cofactor, and cofactor is vitamin D. And then this pathway go on for serotonin synthesis and then melatonin synthesis. When it's coming to dopamine, very, very similar pathway will require vitamin D presence. And vitamin D also take part in proliferation and differentiation of several cells, including cells in our skin and endothelium and some blood cells. Okay, so many roles, very important. So what affect our ability to produce vitamin D? So another kind of question. If you go outside, just go for a walk, is it enough? There are several factors. They divided in environmental and individual. So environmental, the most important one is where is the sun? How high is sun in the sky? Sun need to be at least over 35-degree angle in the sky for us to have UVB present um, in the atmosphere. So for these reasons, when sun is just rising in the morning, already setting, we usually don't have UVB to make vitamin D. 50% of all daily UV radiation will be distributed around 4 hours around local noon, around midday. And then obviously how thick ozone layer, cloud cover, air pollution, how up north we are, how high from the sea level we are, and surface reflection. So lots of compounds can affect our ability to produce vitamin D, just environment. But then it's also individual factors. The main factors is skin type. Are we fair skin or dark skin? Fair skin is considered to be adaptation to live very up north because fair skinned people need less time to make adequate amount of vitamin D. With fair skin, possibly need about 10-15 minutes in the middle of the day to produce adequate amount of vitamin D. People with darker skin tone need longer time exposure, and that's also adaptation as a protection. Very dark skin closer to equator, protecting from UV radiation, because basically closer to equator, the UV radiation gets stronger. Our ability to produce vitamin D also changes with age. Older we are, more daytime and sunshine exposure we need to build vitamin D. And that's the paradox, because when we get older, we get more sedentary and we spend more time indoors. So that's not surprising that older people becoming vitamin D deficient. The clothing, if we have clothes with long sleeves, long trousers, if we fully cover it, that also will prevent us from making vitamin D. Basically, if we use sunscreens, we're not going to make vitamin D. BMI, also very, very important factor. People with higher BMI will be struggling to make vitamin D, and also polymorphism of vitamin D receptors. So it's a genetic variation can affect ability to synthesize vitamin D. So it's important to realize it's actually at mid latitudes. It's latitudes between 30 degree and 60 degree north or south. In winter, UVB decreases to 5% of summer value in winter, but on the higher latitudes over 60 degree north or south, there will be absolutely zero UVB. So on these latitudes, even if you go outside um, for all day totally naked, you will not be able to produce vitamin D, because simply there is no that specific spectrum of light that responsible for that reaction. So this is very interesting study. It's a recent study. It was published in 2022 about duration of vitamin D winter in Europe. And in order to produce this data, to produce this study, scientists from several countries, including Switzerland, Netherlands, and Ireland, summarized data which was collected over 18-year period. And they took data from tropospheric emission monitoring service. Apparently, we have these services, and they analyzed 46 capital cities. So the data was collected between 2004 and 2021. It was very sophisticated methods they used, and what's mean of vitamin D winter, it's mean for how long we don't have UVB in atmosphere at the specific latitude. Because I live in Aberdeen, I put Aberdeen here. Aberdeen is at 57 degree north, somewhere between Riga and Stockholm, and we have approximately 170 something 73 days per year without ability to make vitamin D. For people who live in London, the situation slightly better, 150 days without vitamin D, but it's a considerable part of the year that we, even if going outside, we're not going to build vitamin D. Basically, that duration of vitamin D winter decreasing when we get closer to equator. I suggest that you consider downloading this app, which called D Minder. That's the kind of the picture for this app. That's how it's look on app stores. And in this app, you can enter where you live, your age and other parameters, and you have information relevant to your specific place of residence, when you will have your vitamin D opportunity, when UVB at the maximum, what kind of exposure you need. Very, very useful app. So you will be totally informed when is your next vitamin D opportunity. So if you live in Aberdeen and you open this app, it will say your next vitamin D opportunity maybe in 110 days. And so practically you'll need to wait until March. So how do we survive? How do we survive vitamin D winter? What do we do? I grew up in country which no longer exists. It's the Soviet Union, and in Soviet Union we had these interesting rituals of quartzing. It was quartzing. And this picture, it looks like a circle of young sorcerers somewhere, but it's actually a kindergarten or nursery. And children in the morning will have about 5-10 minutes exposure to UV, B, and C light produced by this lamp, which was called quartz lamp because the core is made of quartz. Usual glass will not allow penetration of UVC and UVB, and hence the quartz was used for that. It's actually a German invention, but Soviets introduced it across the country. So it's not unique one-off picture, although it's not my nursery was photographed. The picture was taken in Murmansk, very, very up north in Soviet Union, former Soviet Union. That was my nursery too. So without exaggeration, we had these morning rituals. Interesting, the teacher have no glass protections here, and this UV lamp is deadly. If you don't protect your eyes, you absolutely can burn your cornea in a matter of few seconds. So that was Soviet take on sunbeds. We also had almost compulsory consumption of fish oil. Here I put advertising of fish oil, and that happy young pioneer smiling as he's going to have a spoonful of sugar. But that fish oil, the most disgusting liquid. It smells awful, it looks awful, it tastes disgusting, and you can just feel sick just looking at that. Fortunately, people learn how to package fish oil in capsules so you can swallow capsules without tasting fish oil itself. Apparently, this was also almost compulsory in some European countries, including UK, until certain age. And this picture of boys queuing to get a portion of vitamin D, I suspect was taken in the UK, just guess it's all boys and the uniform and the houses. It looks like a UK picture. It's certainly not former Soviet Union. But in 70s, this kind of compulsory consumption was abandoned, so it was become more voluntary. In Slavic countries, we also have big love for wild mushrooms. It's very fungophilic nations. And wild mushrooms, they have tendency to accumulate vitamin D2. And if you collect wild mushrooms, you dry them for winter. That's your other source of vitamin D for winter. So certain methods can help to survive such a long period without vitamin D. Now let's move on and look for sunshine and endorphins. That's another slightly complicated picture. You don't need to understand details. So just summarize it very briefly. Again, we're talking about UVB affecting certain protein in our skin. Keratinocytes, it's a part of the skin cells and affect a protein called P53. P53 then affect certain gene which called POMC gene. And POMC gene start producing the polypeptide with the same name. It's called POMC polypeptide, and it's quite a complicated name, pro-opiomelanocortin polypeptide. And then this polypeptide can break in parts. It's called cleaved. It can split in certain parts depending where in the body it is and what's actually required in the body. So body has that amazing capacity to self-regulate. So it can be broken in several parts, and one part of this polypeptide, you'll see in the blue, it's beta endorphin. Wow, beta endorphin is our endogenous opioid. So literally UVB stimulates production of beta endorphin, endogenous opioid, and not just in skin, in plasma, but also in the brain. And this happens very shortly after exposure to UVB. There were studies looking at appearance of beta endorphin in the brain literally after 30 minutes exposure to UVB. So it is amazing to actually understand, and again, evolutionary hugely important, because endogenous opioid, beta endorphin, who involved in pain regulation, and don't we all know that aches and pains, particularly musculoskeletal pain, get worse in winter. This get cold and dark, and somehow it's get a bit easier and manageable in summertime, but it's also enjoyment, and our motivation, our feedback loop, kind of some drive for our motivation. um, might explain that why some people get so addicted to sunbeds, why we all feeling a little bit bluish, kind of, I mean, a bit down, a bit moody when we're coming back from holidays from somewhere sunny place. Actually, because we all have high levels of endorphins on the exposure to sunlight, and when we go back into darkness, that's process is not happening. So evolutionary, again, it's a hugely important. It's mean that our physiology rewarding us for being outside, for being in natural sunlight environment. It's not so many processes actually um, reward us for presence of beta endorphins. So we get dopamine release and endorphins for mating, for finding food, because if we wouldn't have that joy and pleasure and positive feedback loop, why? Why bother? Why to put all this energy? So it's a reward, and the reward indicate that it's very important. So this process play fundamental function in our physiology. And the same process connecting sunshine and melanin. Again, back to the same process, UVB affect the same protein, P3, affect POMC gene, polypeptide, and then it's cleaved again, but some part of these proteins will be described as melanostimulating hormone. So it stimulates production of melanin in skin cells called melanocytes, and then melanin migrate into keratinocytes, and that is responsible for tanning. So when we get a darker skin tone when we sunbathe, so that's our tanning in sunbathing. And it was constantly assumed that melanin is just for protection of skin. It's absorbed electromagnetic radiation, so protect skin further from impact of UV light. But modern studies started discovering very unusual and unexpected mechanisms and functions of melanins. And melanin is a collective form for these pigments, dark colored pigments. So one of these concept come into the concept of human photosynthesis, which is initially on the surface sounds completely crazy, completely implausible. But what scientists done, they looked at the energy requirements for our body based on the law, comparing how much food, for example, small animals consume, like how much a little mouse will consume compared to a huge elephant or apes, in relation to on body weight. And mathematically, they calculated that if our body will only entirely depend on energy from food, we will need to eat around 50 or 170 kilogram of biomass per day. So our body should get a supply of energy from somewhere else. And scientists started looking at the potential role of neuromelanin in the producing literally producing free electrons in the body, because neuromelanin is a semiconductor And the current theory suggests that maybe melanin can play a role in human physiology as a supplementing our energy requirement. We have melanin not just in skin, we have melanin in our brain, some areas of the brain filled with melanin. And that's another huge question. Why is melanin there? What melanin is doing inside of our brain? If it's purely for protection of our body from radiation, why is it inside of the brain? And melanin can absorb anything. It can absorb anything from UVB, from UVC BA to infrared light. It's absorbing all spectrum of solar radiation. So that's a question, why do we need something inside of the brain which absorbs absolutely everything? And scientists looking at the structure and functions of melanin, they discovered that melanin can split water or have a reverse process, actually can join hydrogen and oxygen to make water, so it can work both ways. There are lots of research going in using melanin, predominantly fungal melanin, in bioenergetics. So scientists trying to make some prototype of solar panels with melanin covering in the production of energy, but also suggesting that melanin can humans to get additional energy source, and some brave statements comparing melanin even to human chlorophyll, that both molecules possess intrinsic capacity to transform photonic energy, energy of sun, into free chemical energy. So there is even an Institute of Human Photosynthesis in Mexico under leadership of this chap, Dr. Herrera. He has a dual degree, and he has degree in pharmacology. He has a patent for use of melanin and photoelectrochemical method separating water into hydrogen and oxygen. He has a big team, and they say, although initial concept sounds a bit crazy and breaking all our paradigm, but the research goes on, and how many interesting findings in science initially were perceived as implausible. So just watch this space, and hopefully in the next few years will provide more understanding what melanin is doing in our bodies. So let's move to less controversial aspects of sunshine. So I mentioned that part of our visible spectrum of light also involved in circadian regulation of our body clock. So that is what sunlight does for us. It entrains our internal body clock. We have internal body clock which sets our biological rhythm, but in order to be in tune with natural environment, we have this mechanism of entrainment, and that mechanism facilitated by light. In the presence of light, we are unable to release pineal melatonin in the bloodstream. But in darkness, this process is happening when pineal gland start making melatonin only in darkness and producing pineal melatonin in the bloodstream, and presence of melatonin released from pineal gland signaling night. I emphasize in pineal melatonin because many people assume that this is the only place where melatonin is made, because initially it was discovered in the pineal gland, and it was discovered in 1958. But in late 90s, people start discovering that melatonin is actually also made in our mitochondria and in microbiota in our gut system. And pineal melatonin only constitute 5% of all body melatonin. The primary role of melatonin is antioxidant, and other roles of melatonin evolved depending on the species through the evolution. As I mentioned, it's very, very ancient molecule, and ancient molecules have multitude of roles. So pineal melatonin is evolved role of melatonin signaling night, signaling all body to switch into night mode to start doing the processes and jobs in the body which should be done at night in darkness. And in mitochondria, this picture on the left, as I mentioned, mitochondria also make melatonin, but if pineal melatonin made at night and released at night, mitochondrial melatonin has no circadian dependency. It's made during the day, and here we need presence of near infrared and infrared light to make sure that our mitochondria, which organelles in the cell, make enough melatonin. The research in infrared light, it's not something just new and not just recent. There are lots of research goes back into 80s and even 70s, and it was known for a long time that infrared light is absorbed by cytochrome C in mitochondrial electron transport chain. Then later it was discovered that it also can be absorbed by mitochondrial water, and here the graph demonstrating absorption spectrum dependent on the frequency of light, and you'll see the water absorption spectrum getting quite high in infrared light. And by absorbing infrared light, water are becoming less viscous in mitochondria, and it's mean that our ATP pump can rotate with improved efficiency. So infrared light helps mitochondria to be more efficient, to produce more ATP in some circumstances, but it's a kind of regulating how much ATP need to be produced. It acts as a switch, not just what scientists say, that's act as a switch, controlling how much and when to produce ATP. One of the leading laboratories in the UK investigating the effect of red and near-infrared light based in University College London and the leadership of Professor Glenn Jeffrey. Glenn has exceptional reputation. He is very well educated. He has PhD from Oxford University, obtaining PhD back in 80s. And it's a proper institute, very respectable institute. They publish research with good methodology. And what they discovered very recently, that exposure to infrared light can improve vision in aging population, and also exposure to infrared light can help glucose regulation. It's reducing blood glucose spikes following meals. So it's interesting findings they do. They say they have mentioned previously, they have fascinating technology, or this modern technology that able to detect infrared light and biophotons emitted by body. So it's something to consider and look into. Okay, so that's conclude our part one. Now let's move to more direct clinical application of all this theory. And the important study to mention is related to our worries if we expose ourselves to too much light. People understandably worry about the skin cancer and melanoma, because that was kind of in media for the last many years. We all started using sunscreens and became almost paranoid about detrimental effect of UV radiation skin. So it's interesting study published by Swedish researchers. They conducted longitudinal follow-up study, over 20 years follow-up on almost 30,000 Swedish women. And these women were included in melanoma cohort. They recruited women of different ages who had no cancer at the baseline. Basically, they had no melanoma, and these women stayed in the follow-up for 20 years period. And what scientists concluded that women with active sun exposure habits were at low risk of cardiovascular disease and non-cancer deaths. So the women with more active sun exposure were surviving longer. They had longer life expectancy. Yeah, so kind of um, understandably, these women were assessed how much sun exposure they have. So they had longer life expectancy, and the scientists did not find a difference between occurrence of melanoma in group with high sun exposure and low sun exposure. But what they also found that if women in active sun exposure develop melanoma, the survival rate was higher compared to low exposure group. So that was interesting publication. Was kind of discussed widely. There was some criticism to researchers, but if you're interested, feel free to look at the results yourself. Certainly, it's provided lots of controversy compared to the previous understanding of impact of sunshine on skin cancer. There were several studies looking at the connection between sunshine and mood. And interestingly, one of the old studies was published in 80s, and it was published in a very respectable journal, Acta Psychiatrica Scandinavica. It's one of the very respectable psychiatric journal. This study looked at the presence of serotonin in human brain depending on the season. What researchers done, they took brains of people who had accidental death, maybe a road traffic accident or other accidental death. They dissected brains and look how much serotonin was in the brain depending on the season when a particular person died. And what they discovered that the lowest level of serotonin was between December and January, then it started rising up and was highest in the end of summer and early autumn. So that was known back in 80s, the seasonal impact on serotonin level. And the more practical studies, this study association between sunlight exposure and mental health. It's a Chinese study. It was done on 787 nurses working in operating theaters, basically working in the surgical team. That you mean you spend lots of time in artificial environment with artificial light, and these nurses were assessed and ranked on how much exposure they have to natural light. And there was a very strong correlation that nurses who had more exposure to natural daylight, they were doing better, they were less depressed and less anxious. And nurses who had very little exposure to natural light were more depressed and more anxious. There was also a study looking at the association between solar radiation in mood in residents of Gulf Coast. Well, it's interesting that these people already live in a considerably sunnier environment compared, for example, where we live very up north. The study included 32,000 and a bit participants from different geographical areas, and they were mapped where they live and how much solar radiation in that particular area. And then researchers created the correlation between health outcomes, and they also found very similar outcomes, that people who lived in the areas with higher level of solar radiation, more sun, more sunny days, had better health outcomes. They were less depressed, less anxious, more active, etc. There was systematic review published by Japanese scientists. They actually managed to find 53 studies which were included in systematic review that met the criteria that they set. And they also looked at impact of natural environment, including sunshine exposure on public mental health. And results are very similar. People who had more sun exposure, spent more time outdoors, had considerably better health outcomes. And from these 53 studies, at least 12 we are focusing specifically on vitamin D levels and mood regulation. Okay, so this study is a bit further away from the UK. The next one is a study conducted using UK participants, using the UK Biobank participants. UK Biobank was created in early 2000. It's between 2006 and 2010, and almost 500,000 of UK residents volunteered their life data and their medical data to be analyzed in a variety of studies. So these studies was also longitudinal and look at the huge number of participants, and they examined literally the same correlation between time spent outdoors and health outcomes, including self-reported happiness, enjoyment, the mood regulation, use of antidepressants. And what was found in this study, that each hour of daytime light was associated with greater ease in getting up, less frequent tiredness, fewer insomnia symptoms, earlier chronotype, and each additional hour spent outdoors during the day was associated with low lifetime risk of depression. People who spent more time outdoors were using antidepressant considerably less frequently. They were able to experience joy, pleasure, had better mood, better self-reported happiness. There is an interesting study looking at sunshine and ADHD. I was actually I became curious to look into this topic when one of my patients with ADHD told me how much better she feels on holidays. And I told, well, we all feel better on holidays, but to say no, I mean, cognitively, they kind of can concentrate better, less distracted, focus better, attention better. So I decided to look if there were any studies done, impact of sunshine on ADHD. And actually, there was a study, and it was published in 2013. And I was very reassured that this study collected data well before we started experiencing almost epidemic of ADHD, when people became so aware of ADHD that now it's the most diagnosed mental health condition. So data for this study was collected between 2008 and 2010 and published in 2013. Researchers in the United States analyzed a rate of ADHD diagnosis in different states across the country and mark that on the geographical map, analyzing solar radiation. They also had several countries for comparison. This study is published in journal of American Medical Association, so it's also highly respected study. And what they found that the states with more sunshine had low prevalence of ADHD diagnosis compared to more northern states. Again, it's good that study was involved in one country. So United States, such a huge country, that they could do this study because obviously there will be the national differences in approach of ADHD diagnosis across different countries. So if it's one country, it provides more consistency. So that's very interesting. In analyzing the research, they speculate that it's a circadian rhythm regulation, which considerably better in more south states, is more distinct pattern of day and night. That might be explanation why people have less ADHD in south states. And now looking at the sunshine and blood pressure, the mechanism how sunshine control blood pressure, it's through UVA. I mentioned that UVA penetrate deep in the skin but has less biological activity. However, UVA can help to release stores of nitric oxide in our skin, and nitric oxide able to dilate our blood vessels. So in exposure of sunshine, usually blood pressure goes down. So again, interesting, that study quite almost ancient, published in 1982 and published in a very respectable journal, British Medical Journal. Study was done by British Medical Research Council, involved 14,000 participants, were done across the country in different clinical settings and different research centers. And people were assessed for response to treatment with propranolol, diuretic medication. That kind of medications were used back then to treat blood pressure, but they were also placebo control. And kind of unexpectedly, they noted considerable variation in blood pressure depending on the season, particularly marked in men of a slightly older age group. So there were noticeable decrease in both systolic and diastolic blood pressure around summertime, in placebo group and all treatment groups. So regardless if people were taking medication, not taking medication, blood pressure were low in summertime and was higher in winter period. So that was again known in medicine since 80s. Another study looking at sunshine and multiple sclerosis, very similar to ADHD study. The cohort of patients with multiple sclerosis was identified between 2008 and 2010. 744,000 participants between age 18 and older identified with multiple sclerosis, and then researchers look where these people live, and they mark them geographically. And very similar to ADHD, they noted that there was a very direct correlation between distribution of multiple sclerosis depending on latitude. So the more up north we go, more patients suffer from multiple sclerosis. Similar studies were done in some European countries, were replicated. And one of the explanations is the vitamin D deficiencies in Nordic states. And as I mentioned at the beginning of talk, vitamin D has a significant impact in immunomodulation. So it's reducing our overactive immune response, which involved in autoimmune conditions. But it is only one of possible mechanisms because sunshine has a multitude of other impacts on immunomodulation and not related to vitamin D. So vitamin D is one of the components, but say that's also the fact is now known in medicine and neurology that multiple sclerosis is more prevalent in Nordic states and countries. And now let's look at the natural light spectrum composition. So just what is in spectral composition of light. These illustrations are taken from the website called Fluxometer, and it's very interesting site to play with. So you can go on the site and look and the spectrum composition of different gadgets that you have, what kind of light emitted from these gadgets. And that is what we have in a natural daylight. This spectra of light in Los Angeles in 6 o'clock in the morning twilight. We see quite a marked presence of blue part of spectrum of light, and particularly circadian regulator spectrum of light at 480 nanometers. This light signals our brain it's daytime. In response to this part of light, our brain stops releasing pineal melatonin and switches into day mode. And then as day progress, so it's 10 o'clock now, it's sunny, more infrared light start building up, red, near infrared, and infrared. And that's a green grass in the green area. You'll see how much red light and near infrared, and if it will be extended from infrared, you'll see even higher level of infrared, because greenery, the trees, grass, or shrubs, they don't absorb infrared. We humans need infrared, so it's very, very important for us to be in a green space. That is our therapeutic kind of forest bathing. When we bath in infrared light, remember I told the impact on mitochondria. But greenery does not absorb infrared, so it's a kind of it goes around that and create a very enriched infrared environment. But what about artificial lights? What do we have inside of our houses? And we now spend over 90% of our lives indoors. Initially, we had incandescent light, and incandescent light had a huge proportion of near infrared. But this is not economical, and therefore the engineers came up with more energy efficient light. Now we have LED, which do not give us any infrared. So we infrared deficient. And if we indoors, we don't get any UV light. We don't get UVA, we don't get UVB, we don't get infrared. We only have very disproportionate peaks of blue, predominantly in the area where our circadian regulator involved. When we get signal from the light, don't make any more melatonin, it's daylight, so it's constantly daylight if you sit in front of artificial gadgets. We don't get infrared. And to make things even worse, modern buildings, particularly business buildings, the kind of high level multi-floor buildings, they use low emissivity glass for energy sufficient to make sure that buildings not overheat in summer and don't lose energy in winter. But this glass blocks all near infrared and infrared. So we become even more deficient in this spectrum of light, which has profound biological effect on our physical health and mental health. Okay, so what can we do? We move into the final part. It is my prescription. So at every consultation with my patients, I preach, go outside, please go outside. I always ask, how much time do you spend outdoors? It is exceptionally important, please go outside. So this is a prescription. Spend as much time outside as you can. And I have this my personal ritual, morning coffee in the garden. Before I start a day, I will go outside. If it's summertime, if it's weather permittent, try to be bare feet and have minimal clothing, no sunglasses, and if possible, don't put your contact lenses yet. Just about 10-15 minutes outside before you start the day to get your morning light. I have a cat, Bengal cat, George, and George is my most obedient patient. He always happy to come outside for morning coffee, and you see, no closing, bare feet. So he always follows my instructions and advice. That is why he's so energetic. Not like my husband, when I told him go outside and to be solar panel, be human antenna and solar panel, and he didn't take his shoes off, and he keeps his sunglasses. So it's still better to be outside like that, but we need a little bit exposure, not a huge amount of exposure. We need exposure to unprotected light. So take your sunglasses off, only use sunglasses as a protection from intense sunlight, not as a fashion statement. And if you're struggling to know how much time you need to produce adequate level of vitamin D, I remind you, use D-Minder app. It will help you considerably to guide you when you need to go outside and how much time you will need. It will indicate intensity of UV light, and also kind of obviously indicate if you need any protection or UV so low that you don't need protection. Do gardening, because gardening is basically you're outside, you're outdoors, you get natural daylight, but you're also grounding if possible. Yeah, take your shoes for a few minutes for grounding. It's a very relaxing. There were studies looking into cortisol reduction and very, very positive impact on mental health, reduction and anxiety in people who do gardening. If possible, exercise outside. So that's me here at the top trying to exercise in Greenland during our expedition in Greenland. Again, all benefits of exercise will be multiplied if you do it outside. And in general, create a little living space outside, a little patio, or just put a bench where you can sit, a chair where you can have your tea or coffee outside. So every moment of dry weather, no rain, a little bit of sunshine, so you can go outside and spend a few minutes there. Go on sunny holidays, so it's very, very therapeutic. And if you're somewhere very sunny, you can try your hands on human photosynthesis. Here's me experimenting with human photosynthesis, of course, as a joke, putting seaweed on the head. But I hope that you wouldn't have any guilt now attached while you're booking your sunny holidays. It is therapy. It's very therapeutic. If sunny holidays is not your thing, there are some people who just don't like heat and don't do good with heat, you can go actually high into mountains. You can go hill walking, mountain walking, skiing, and although it will be cold in mountains, the solar radiation considerably higher, so you'll get your amount of vitamin D when you go to higher altitudes. But you need to be mindful that actually the higher you go, the higher solar radiation, and that is where you need to be more careful and make sure that you have adequate skin protection when you're on higher altitudes. But regardless the weather, regardless where you live, even if you live very, very up north, get outside. Vitamin D, it's only one little story of sunshine. It is important, but it's only one of many, many aspects of sunshine that help us with mood regulation, our physical health. So even in winter, even if you know that you're not going to get vitamin D, get outside because you'll get other therapeutic impact of sunlight. And look how beautiful that winter sun in Aberdeenshire. If you are interested in this topic and want to look a little bit deeper, this is a couple papers I suggest you review, because I found these papers the most fascinating about melatonin and about UV light effect on our brain and endocrine system. So basically, because of the time constraint presentation, I only touched on this topic, just only put the most important things. So if you will read this paper about UV light, I guarantee you'll be very, very surprised. how much impact of light provide to our health. This is very interesting book about photobiology. It's more suitable maybe for students and kind of secondary 5, secondary 6 pupils. And this book of light is suitable for even primary school pupils and overall general public. It's interesting review of light. Usually at the end of presentation, I'll say it's time for questions, but you are watching this on a recording. So for you, it's time for sun celebration. In the past, with our pre-industrial society ancestors, the main holidays in all cultures were related around winter and summer solstices and spring and autumn equinoxes. And I hope now I understand why, because maybe our ancestors had better understanding how important sun for our health. So celebrate sun. I put the dates here for your celebration. Winter solstice will be on 21st of December. So celebrate. That is when sun is reborn. Look again how beautiful sun is on Aberdeenshire. There is no filters, no enlargement. That's just a natural perception of sun because sun is so low on horizon that appears so huge. It's fascinating. And remind that there's an app, vitamin D app called D Minder that will help you to navigate through the vitamin D story of sunlight. Thank you very much for your attention.